as well, and that's why you're seeing them all over the ground. And my friend and I were listening in horror, and once she was done talking, we somehow appeared back in our world on the same spot in the street. And we talked about how grateful we were that we were back in our world where that wasn't happening. And this is only the beginning of the dream.
Thank you so much for joining us for the 15th episode of the Let's Dream podcast. Today we will be having an interview with a great dreamer. She's got a lot of really interesting dream stories, and I think all of you will really enjoy them. And as always, keep in mind, if you have any dream stories that you want to share, just let us know at contact@letsdreampodcast.com. And without further ado, here is the interview. Thank you so much for joining me today, Brianna, for this episode of the Let's Dream podcast. And before we get into the dream stories and all that, I just wanted to go over a couple of questions with you. The first one being, are you an avid dreamer? Like a lot of people like myself, we like keep daily dream journals. Is that something that you like to do?
I don't necessarily know that I have a journal for dreams, but I write down all of my interesting dreams for the most part. And I think there was one that I didn't write down where it was just kind of crazy and didn't really make a lot of sense. But this one was really weird in that there was a theme of stairs and like never-ending stairs, which I think has some sort of meaning, but I forgot to look it up and just kind of never really dove deep into that one. But I usually do think a lot about, like, if I have a dream, it's just like, wow, like, what does that mean for me? And kind of like, where is that coming from? And oftentimes my dreams are super, super whack. But usually, I can usually tie it back to something that I'm going through, or sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm going through, and sometimes I'm just like, wow, that was really crazy, and I have absolutely no idea where that came from. But usually, yeah, it ties to something that I'm dealing with, so.
Okay. Well, that's actually an excellent point that you bring up. I do think that a lot of the times dreams have a significant meaning, and often they're tied to emotions, but sometimes they're just random. I don't think every single dream has a significant meaning. Kind of like how you just described. But as far as the next question, do you lucid dream?
I have never had a lucid dream, no.
Oh man. Oh, you really have to try it. For example, I used to live with a roommate, and he's the one that told me about lucid dreaming. And as soon as I found out about lucid dreaming, I was amazed, and I immediately did like a deep dive in learning the different techniques and what works for me. And it can be kind of weird and frustrating at first, but once you figure out a schedule and what technique works for you, it's so worth it. For example, I have a ton of food allergies, but if I lucid dream, I can eat absolutely anything I want and not worry about like gaining weight or having a reaction. And it's so cool. And I don't know why, but I always find myself trying to sell it to people. I just think it's such an awesome and unique experience.
I just don't know that I'd ever be able to do it, just because, I don't know, I already have sleep problems in general, and so, like, trying to, like, get myself to lucid dream is, like, I guess I've never really tried it just because I didn't know if it would work or not. But, I mean, when I was little, I think there was a period of time where I would just have really crazy dreams, like, all the time, and so, like, I would get excited to go to sleep because I was like, oh, like, what am I gonna dream? Because it was mystery. Like, I never knew what I was gonna dream. It was just something whack, and I'm like, okay, like, one day I'm killing an octopus spider with a sword and saving a town, and the next day I'm talking to the moon.
Nice.
They were just really wacky, and like I was just so excited to fall asleep.
And, that's a good point, because you don't necessarily have to lucid dream to enjoy dreams. In fact, before I ever found out about lucid dreaming, I would just keep dream journals and dream sketchbooks. And dreams were one of the very first subject matters that I would practice drawing. And the thing that really kind of always stuck with me since I was little is just I was always fascinated with dreams and how we can go throughout our regular daily life, and then at the end of the day, you just fall asleep. Sometimes during the day, you fall asleep, and then you can have like an incredible adventure, like in another dimension, and then you come back to this reality or waking reality. And then people would just go, "Oh, that was just a dream," and I would be like, "Yeah, but it doesn't make it any less of an amazing experience."
Yeah. In a way, I would kind of compare dreaming to reading a little bit. Just because, and I don't read as much as I used to, but like diving into a book is somewhat like having a dream in that, um, at least for me, I have very vivid imagery. And whenever, you know, these writers are putting so much imagery into their books, it's like, oh, wow, I feel like I'm actually immersed in this world. And dreaming is like, I'm like, but dreaming is you get to make it yourself. Like your subconscious is making up a world for you and placing you in it, or maybe even not placing you in it. I have dreams where I was not in the dream, where I was a different person or just kind of watching what was going on. But it was like you're kind of immersed in that, and it's just so cool.
That's actually a really good analogy. I guess I would compare dreaming to reading a book and lucid dreaming maybe to writing a book. And it's true that oftentimes we can transport ourselves into these different worlds almost when we're awake. It's just that dreams can be so sensational and you can feel them at your core and they can be very extreme.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now the dream that you shared with me, it was really great. Thank you, by the way, for sharing that with me. I love hearing people's dreams, and I know that sometimes dreams can be very personal. So I'm always very thankful when people are willing to share them. And your dream illustrates a lot of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's kind of a good example why some dreams happen. And to me, dreaming is a very human thing. Like if an alien was to come down to Earth and to ask me what are some of the characteristics that describe being human, I would probably say one is to make art and be creative. I think that's something that's kind of intrinsic to human beings.
Yeah.
And another one would definitely be dreams, which can also be considered a creative thing, but for sure something that I associate with humanity. So, if you could just go over the dream that you had with our listeners and describe it in as much detail as you feel comfortable.
Okay, so in this dream, it started out and I was riding in a van with three girls I was friends with. I actually don't have any clue who they were. But in my dream, like they were my friends and I trusted them. Um, well, we ended up getting to into a wreck uh, in the woods, and we all flew out of the vehicle. And we ended up being okay, but somehow we all got sucked away in different directions by something we couldn't see. I eventually got my bearings and stopped spinning around like it was, like I was literally like sucked up. Uh, but I found this girl holding my arm. Her arms and legs were so skinny they could barely be considered real limbs, honestly. And her skin was pink, like it had a pink tint to it, and everything she touched started turning this really sickening pink color. It wasn't like a pretty pink; it was like a really annoying, like hot pink almost.
Okay.
It's hard to describe it, but when I was younger, I kind of associated pink as like a bad color for a while, which is funny because I wear pink now. Um, but I really didn't like pink whenever I was little and somehow associated it negatively. Probably just because I was a tomboy and like I just wasn't very girly and like was kind of a rebel in I guess in that way, like I don't want to be seem girly and
Okay.
but anyway, so I guess that might be where that connotation comes from the pink color. But um, Anyway, her hair was done up really pretty and she was wearing makeup, but she wasn't pretty. Like she was wearing makeup and her hair was done nice, but like she was really emaciated. And like her makeup was like bright red lipstick and like just like dramatic eye makeup, and it just made her face almost look worse and kind of scary. Um but anyway, despite how emaciated she was, I couldn't get away from her and she kept whispering things into my ear. We were walking around and it felt kind of like she was leading me in circles, but she said that we were heading somewhere. She just wouldn't tell me where it was. And it almost seemed like someone else was in charge and she was taking me to this person, but she didn't really say much about them, and there wasn't really any indication of anything that was going on. It was mostly just me being led around and being confused.
Okay.
Um but somehow later in the dream I got away from her and I was running through the forest, which now that I was away from her was mostly gray. There was a little bit of green here and there, but it was, for the most part, just a gray forest, really gloomy. Um, and I remember I was carrying this stick that I was using as a walking stick. And I remember thinking about my grandpa being dead and that I had to reach him somehow, which was really strange because I mean, at the time of the dream, he had been dead for 5 years, so
Okay.
um, it was like that was so weird that I was just like suddenly thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to go to him or whatever. Like it was just really strange. Like that was just so out of the blue because that was something that I hadn't thought about in a really long time. Um, well, suddenly my feet felt like lead and my eyes were really heavy again, and I noticed that the girl had her hand on my arm. And she said, "It'll be better if you just forget him. Better if you just forget the pain. You don't need it."
Oof.
And my arm, yeah, and my arm and the walking stick started to turn pink. And I remember I was like trying really hard to pull myself out of this, but it was really difficult. And I remember for a little bit at least, the pink kind of slowed. Like I stopped turning pink as fast. And then she said, "If you stick with me, you'll feel better." And um I screamed and tried to pull away from her, and she had barely had a grip on me. Like I mean, I'm talking like emaciated girl. She's barely grabbing me, but it felt like I was pulling my body through thick honey.
Gotcha.
Um and that was pretty much the end of the dream. Like it stopped there. I didn't really have a conclusion to it, but it was really weird thinking about it. And if you want me to wait for the explanation of what I think it came from, I can. But
No, no, go ahead. I'm interested to hear, and I think our listeners will be too.
yeah, in a way, I feel like thinking about the death of my grandpa kind of represented grief and like healthy grief in a way because I mean I kind of have I've had a lot of things happen to me, and so like there's um a lot of things that I haven't dealt with just because it's, you know, it's difficult to process those things and it's been a long time, but those things are still affecting me today, and I feel like that was kind of representative of that. It's like, oh, like, you know, this happened a long time ago, but you still need to process that. And it wasn't necessarily my grandpa specifically, just a lot of the things that happened around that time.
Okay.
And uh even before that, like years prior, like within my childhood and stuff. And so, and I think that like the skinny girl was fear, because oftentimes we build up our problems to be so big, but they're in reality they're really small, they're thin, but they still have such a strong hold on you. And it's like, you know, it's really hard to escape it, that despite the fact that it might seem like it's small. It's like it's really not, in a way. Like it's, you know, my fears prevented me from grieving properly just because I pushed the bad thoughts away and I forgot them and never really grieved. And so like they come back, like they'll just keep coming back. If you don't deal with it, it just keeps coming back and it gets harder and harder to deal with it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree completely. And thank you so much for sharing that. I remember when I read your dream, I read it a couple of times, and I remember thinking, wow, this is a really introspective person because I talk to a lot of people about dreams, and often people want somebody to give them a meaning. Like, I actually have a decent amount of people send me messages asking me to interpret their dreams, and I can always give my opinion, but often people don't like it or it makes them feel uncomfortable when I throw the question back to them and I ask them, well, what do you think it means? Since after all, you're the one that dreamt it. You dreamt the dream, so it's important to hear your thoughts. So there's a lot of layers to your dream, but the main thing that I really like is how introspective you are about it. Because I've had a lot of dreams where it's like, it doesn't really make sense, but I stop and think, okay, well, what were the emotions that I was feeling? How did I feel about this thing that happened in the dream?
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason I keep a dream journal because I'll go back and read it and think, okay, this is all completely unbelievable and fantastic, but clearly it's tied to an emotion that I'm experiencing. And I know that there's theories out there as to why people dream, and I know that there's some good scientific evidence to back up some of these theories. But one thing that I really like about dreams is that they're fairly unknown, and one can speculate a lot about them. However, as the individual experiencing the dream, you can sit there and say, okay, this clearly had some significance to me, or okay, this is just some random dream experience. Now, another thing that I really liked about your dream is the strong imagery. For example, the girl was pink and was turning the forest pink, and then when you got away from her, it turned gray. Do you always dream with such vivid visuals?
A lot of times, yeah, a lot of times I do. Like there's just so many different things to see, and like it's just very vivid. Like I'm like, all right,
Okay.
like I had a dream about hell and like everything. Like I can map out everything, like which direction everything is in, um, and how like the pathways that I took, and like for instance, I was part of that dream was um I was getting punished for like not saving someone. And I was on a train and the train went on forever. But it kept moving towards hell. So like you could keep running backwards through the train and it would go on forever, but it also kept moving on forever. So you had to like keep running. And
Interesting.
like I can kind of remember like what the inside of the train looked like, and at some point there was stairs again. There was several different sets of stairs in this dream, and there was stairs again in the train. And then me and the other people I was with, there was like I think a family, like a mom, a dad, and like a teenage boy, and we were like running up the stairs to try to escape hell, and like we couldn't, and we just had to keep running forever, basically,
Oh,
until we
wow.
finally exhausted ourselves and you know went into hell. And like just like seeing there was like this big mountain and lava, and like there was like a force field almost that we kind of like disappeared into, or like where the train disappeared into.
Okay.
and um and like you couldn't see anything past that, but basically that force field was like, um I guess in a way it was like a portal or something like that, where like it disappeared, and that once you went past that, like that was where you went into hell or something like that. And so, but
Wow.
yeah, most of my dreams have pretty strong imagery. Now, not all of them do. Like I did have one. I mean, this one had, I guess, like specific imagery, but it was like very small and located. I had a dream the other day that my sister-in-law gave me a watch, but she 100% did not give me. But I remember looking at the clasps, and like those there's I get advertisements for these magnetic watches all the time, where like you or the strap is magnetic,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
like the like strap itself, or not the strap, like the clasp was magnetic, and it like switched sides if you wanted to put it on the other wrist or something. It was kind of weird, but like that was the only thing I saw was the watch. Like there was no background. And usually there's a background in my dream of something, and it was literally just the watch on my wrist. And that was it. So things like that. But for the most part, yeah, there's always some sort of background, some sort of imagery going on, and it, it's kind of like it ties the whole dream together.
Okay. Now, I have to ask this question, and some people look at me kind of weird whenever I ask it. But because you have such strong visuals and kind of like sensational dreams, have you ever experienced a dream? This is a serious question. Have you experienced a dream that felt more real than this waking reality?
I don't know if it was necessarily more real, but there have been many times where I've had dreams that like it like I was surprised to realize that it wasn't real. Um, and there were some times where it would be like a crazy dream, but I wouldn't think about it immediately when I woke up, and I would think about it later, and I wouldn't even realize that I was anxious about it until later, and then it came to my mind. I'm like, wow, that was not real. And obviously it could not physically be real, but it was still in the back of my mind that like it felt so real to me while I was in that dream that it was quite literally a shock to me to find out that it wasn't real. So there has been moments like that, but not necessarily where I'm like, oh wow, this dream is that felt more real than real life.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, it doesn't happen often to me, but for example, I've been keeping dream journals for about 10 years now. And so far, it doesn't happen often, but I've definitely had like 3 or 4 dreams where after I woke up from them, it took me like a couple of minutes to realize, oh, okay, I'm this person, this is me. Have you ever had that experience where it takes a little bit to realize that that was just a dream?
Yes, yes, definitely, yeah. Because uh, it depends. Sometimes I'll think about the dream immediately when I wake up, and sometimes it'll take me a minute. And so it's usually the times where it takes me a minute to think about the dream, where it feels the most, I guess, intense and like a shock to me that I'm like, wow, I'm okay, I'm here, I'm actually in my bed. Like,
Got it.
those are usually the times when it's the most, I guess, shocking, is whenever it kind of takes a minute for me to remember the dream, because then it's like I'm becoming slowly aware of my existence, if that makes any sense.
It does, yeah. And that's exactly how I would describe it too. Now, let me ask this follow up question that's kind of related. Have you ever had a dream where you woke up and the dream felt like it lasted years?
Not years, but I have had dreams where it felt like it lasted months.
Okay.
And it was like a weird experience where like a lot of things happened in the dream, and the dream felt very long, and it was like it just happened over a long period of time, and it's like, wow, all of those things that happened just totally didn't happen. But it's like I said, like almost like a shock for a minute before I bring myself back to reality. It's like, wow, that was like that none of that happened at all, and here I am right here. And it's just weird. Like it really does take me a minute. I'm like, okay, all right, I am me again.
Well, so I agree. Relative to everything else in the waking life, obviously the dream didn't happen. But I was talking to a good friend of mine that I like to discuss dreams with, and we were getting into these conversations where we contemplate consciousness and try to think about how exactly does that function.
Yeah.
Because let's say you have a dream where you're being mauled by a lion. And that's a really freaky experience, but you can feel the whole spectrum of pain and fear.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you wake up, you're like, whoa, that was intense. Like,
I've had dreams that have woken me up out of fear. Like and whenever I really don't know how to describe this, I have tried to describe this to several people, and it really just, I mean, it barely even makes sense to me. But when I was little, I used to have this reoccurring nightmare where I was either a big log rolling on tiny logs, or a tiny log rolling, like a tiny stick rolling on big logs.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, that was very painful, rolling on the logs. And I, like, once again, it doesn't really make any sense, especially because logically that wouldn't hurt even if I was rolling on logs, like as a human being.
Right.
Wouldn't really hurt that bad. It was just like in my dream. Um, it was, I guess, just a visual, but like, it's so difficult to describe. But yeah, it was like I actually physically felt the pain, and I would sometimes I wouldn't wake up. Sometimes I would wake up, and I would, like, it would take me a minute to fall back asleep, just because it was like, wow, that was scary.
Yeah.
And it stopped happening, I think, after the age of 10. But yeah, I would get that nightmare. Like, I got it so many times, probably at least 100 times.
Wow.
Like, it was definitely, like, it was reoccurring.
Wow, that's so cool. Well, that's really reminds me of another topic I'd like to get into is obviously you've experienced a lot of different states in your dreams, but have you ever had a dream where your senses got switched around, like to where you can taste color or see sound? Have you ever had anything like that?
Oh my goodness, no, I wish, actually, now, now that you say that.
Okay. Well, now you can try to do it. But that's another thing, which is why I often talk up lucid dreaming. And people that lucid dream regularly already know all this. But you can basically have any experience you can imagine, which is a lot. And you just can't do that in real life. And for example, one of my favorite things, and anyone out there that lucid dreams, I totally urge you to try this. It would be to transform your body into different elements like fire or water or water vapor, and that's a good example of how dreams are just pretty much limitless. And the next thing that I really kind of wanted to ask you is if you've ever had like, because dreams, your brain is always scanning information when you're awake, and it's kind of piecing it together when you're asleep or dreaming. I was just wondering, have you ever had a problem or something you were trying to figure out in your waking life and you just couldn't get it, even though like you spent a lot of time working on it, and then you go to sleep and you have a good night's rest, and then in the morning you wake up and somehow the answer just comes to you? Have you ever had that?
Maybe not, and not a specific instance that I can think of. I mean, a good night's sleep will, I mean, a lot of things. So it will make my mind more clear once I finally get some good sleep. Just because I mean, I actually struggle with insomnia,
Oh,
so there is that. Um, I mean, not necessarily because of a dream. Like, I've never really had an answer or anything like that come to me in a dream. I've
okay.
heard of that happening to people, and but no, it's never happened to me.
Okay. Okay, well, I just like asking that question for fun sometimes just to see how people respond. And I know some people's answers can be a little out there, like an external entity brought the answer to you, and I can't really support or deny that possibility. It's just that if you can't prove it, there's no. I just try to avoid things that I can't prove. But I know that some of my friends, for example, have had this happen where, for example, one friend told me when he was doing some intensive research on a project, he was very tired and fell asleep at his desk. But then when he woke up, he kind of like, he was like, aha, okay, I got the answer. And I think maybe sometimes what happens is, our brains are always scanning information, and then like if you have a problem you're trying to solve and you're kind of like immersed in it, but then you take a break, you go to sleep and you let your brain relax, then that answer can come to you. But anyway, that's enough about that. So far, the dream stories that you shared with us have been really interesting, and I was just wanting to know if you have any other stories you'd like to share with our listeners.
Potentially. Let me see if I wrote this one down. I am not entirely sure if I did. Um, I really hope I did, because this one was like, I don't know that I did. Oh, I
Do
can
you
probably
remember it?
remember it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember it for the most part. It's just going to actually, I might have even posted it. Actually, I think that I did because it was honestly pretty freaky. So I'll go ahead and start on it while I'm kind of looking for the post to remind me of all the details and everything. But
Okay.
um, it basically the premise of it was like the government started giving people this happy drug to like cure people's depression and make everyone happy. And it started turning everyone into rape monsters.
Whoa.
Um, it was kind of freaky. Okay, where is it? Um, so the dream. Oh, here it is. Okay, so the dream started out with me walking along my childhood street with a friend. Once again, this friend didn't have a name or a face. I just know that she was friend, or I just know that we were friends. So once again, visual. This is my childhood street. Like I can picture everything.
Okay.
And like the street lights were, the locations where the street lights were, like everything. So it was nighttime, but the street lights were lit, and all of a sudden, I don't know why my dreams also have like this weird force field type of thing, but like we ended up walking into an alternate dimension. Like 1 second we were walking on my street, and then the second we passed through this invisible wall, and it was still like on Earth, but it was suddenly just like chaotic, and it was a different place. Like it wasn't on my street. It was like a small town or something.
Okay.
And when we faced through this invisible wall, we saw tons of people running around just in panic. And here's the thing, is that I've actually not really had any history with sexual assault, and so this dream just was really out of the blue. Um so most of the men were naked and running around on all fours and tackling women and raping them, and some men and women were just like mutually doing the life out of each other,
Oh wow.
like animals basically. um and some of the men were just like kind of half naked, just running around aimlessly, like they just didn't know what was going on. And my friend and I were freaking out and not knowing what was going on, and we walked into a hospital, and just like rabid naked people were just everywhere having very violent sex.
Oof.
Like it was scary. And we got out of the hospital and back onto the streets, and eventually we stopped one of the fleeing women to talk to her, and went inside a building in a back alley to talk. And she said one day the government introduced this happy drug. It was supposed to help cure everyone of stress, mental illness, and make everyone calm and happy. Well, we all started taking it, and at first things were okay. We were all very happy and just enjoying life. Basically, she said it all started one day, but one day the men started getting like really horny, and the women were too, but not like the men. Like it affected them differently, I guess. And basically, like they slowly kind of turned into like animals, and um, some of the women have turned as well, and that's why you're seeing them all over the ground. And my friend and I were listening in horror, and once she was done talking, we somehow appeared back in our world on the same spot in the street. And we talked about how grateful we were that we were back in our world where that wasn't happening. And this is only the beginning of the dream. We walked back to my house, and the TV was on, and it was turned to the news channel, and the news anchor was talking about a new happy drug that we were required to take. And he was talking about it like it was this wonderful thing, and my friend and I realized in horror that the Earth we walked into wasn't just an alternate dimension, it was Earth in the future. And so we panicked and tried to tell everyone we knew not to take the drug, but it didn't work. They were already under the influence of it and didn't really see the problem. And the drug never wore off either. Like once you took the drug, it stayed in the system forever.
Wow.
So fast forward a few years, and it's basically the apocalypse, like kind of like The Walking Dead. And there were groups of people, men and women, who stuck together to protect themselves from the rabid people. Um, and I was in one of those groups, and there was one guy in our group, and he was, for the most part, able to fight off the effects of the drug, and he was still normal. Um, he just, I guess, faced temptation from time to time, but he was kind of like one of our protectors, I guess. And there was me, my friend from the beginning of the dream, the guy, and then two other girls in our group. And we were set up on the top floor and rooftop of this one building. And the rooftop was just flat concrete. And I was up on the roof, and I went down inside the building, and when I did, I could hear rock music playing. I checked the cameras, but I couldn't find anything, and like it was in the same building that we were in. And later that day, I went to a nearby park to get some fresh air by myself. Not really sure why I was out by myself, but it was my dream and I wasn't controlling it. I guess I was subconsciously. Um, anyway, while I was out, I heard that same rock music and hid behind some bushes. And I saw a group of people walking, three boys and one girl, all teenagers. They were laughing and joking, but they seemed kind of threatening, just the way that they were acting, I guess, and I didn't really want to approach them, but I knew they were living in our building somewhere close to the bottom. And so I snuck back into our hideout and told our group about it, just like, hey, there's other people in our building, like, let's be cautious. Um, and we watched the cameras for a while, and we could see them walking back towards the building, but once they got in, we couldn't see them anymore. And the dream skips to a point where we hear of a group of men who also aren't rabid. And my friend wanted to go spy on them, but they ended up catching her and brought her inside this room. This is where it also gets kind of scary. They were all dressed up like doctors, and they put her on one of those doctor beds you sit on when you go to like a regular doctor to get a checkup. Like
Okay.
not a hospital bed, it was like one of the doctor beds. And she was somehow wearing a hospital gown. I don't know how it got on her. They didn't put it on her. She was just suddenly wearing it in my dream. Um, and two men were holding each shoulder down and her head, and then there was another man at her feet, and another one standing off to the side. And she was crying and begged them not to rape her.
Oof.
And the men told her they wouldn't, and then put a cloth on her face, and she calmed down a little bit. And I was watching through a window, I guess, and I watched the guy at her feet unbuckle his pants, and then he moved towards her nightgown to lift it up, and I like burst into the room at that point. And these weren't like rabid men, and they definitely knew what they were doing despite being under the influence of the drug. And so I screamed at them to stop, and my friend started screaming once she realized what was going to happen. And the four men looked over at me angrily, but they paused what they were doing. And I grabbed my friend and we ran out of the building. And they walked out after us, yelling at us to come back and that they saying that they didn't want to hurt us. But we kept running and we had to fight off more rabid men that were on all fours, but back to our hideout. And that was pretty much the end of my dream. And
Wow.
I honestly have absolutely no idea why I had that dream. Just once again, because I've never had like any any sexual assault things happen to me, and so it was just very out of the blue. And that's one dream that I still honestly can't find like a meaning to. Like I've thought of all my different dreams, even the one about hell. Like it was, I was having a lot of anxiety at the time, and this one was just, I honestly have no idea. Like it was just a dream that I had, and it was more like something that happened to me, I guess, as a dream. Like the dream happened to me rather than I had the dream. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, now that's makes sense, but man, that was quite the dream. Well,
That was a bit too much.
no, well, thank you for sharing that because nightmares are dreams too,
Yeah.
They can be very dark. They can definitely, that kind of reminded me of when I was young and I never was afraid of clowns or had nightmares about them. But after seeing Stephen King's It, I ended up having nightmares about clowns,
Oh,
but not the new one, but the old one. You know, when where it was like really realistic looking and really scary. So, do you think it's possible? Maybe, like, I know for myself, if I watch something scary, I'll probably end up having nightmares. And I know it varies from person to person, but do you think it's possible that maybe you saw something like a movie or a show or something in the news that impacted you, kind of like to start having that dream?
given that it was like um half a year ago, I mean, I don't really watch horror movies. I don't really like them. They're just not very entertaining to me, and so it's funny considering a lot of my dreams have somewhat of a horror element to them that I don't watch horror movies. I'm like, I have my own dreams. I don't need movies.
Sure, I agree. And I don't really like watching scary stuff either. I'll just, every now and then, if my fiance is watching something scary, I'll sit down and watch it with her. But, have you ever seen the new Twilight Zone? I know you don't watch a lot of scary stuff, but that dream actually reminded me a lot of this one episode. And there's like this meteor that falls down to Earth and like starts infecting all the men, and it starts making them like really testosterone driven, kind of like either wanting to mate or
Yeah.
just fight. And that's kind of what that dream reminded me of. But thank you so much for sharing it with us. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners enjoyed it too. And it's good to think about, not only the good dreams but the bad dreams. It's kind of good to, I think, to just think about the dreams that you're experiencing. But anyway, well, I think we've come towards the end of our podcast episode, and I just really want to say thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed hearing your stories, and you're welcome back on anytime.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Let's Dream podcast. If you have any stories that you'd like to share, or if you even think you'd like to come on and tell our audience maybe some bizarre or interesting dream that you've had that we all might enjoy listening to, let us know. Write to us at the contact@letsdreampodcast.com or anywhere on social media. Let's Dream Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Let's Dream Pod on Twitter. And we will see you next time.